You know, I remember back when I was a wee lad, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and the Nintendo Wii was the pinnacle of human technology. It still is. I watched a lot of random movies when I was little, anything ranging from B-list dinosaur movies to F-list zombie movies, and sometimes I'd really shake things up by watching a good movie. I also watched a few Godzilla movies, although I never really thought much of them at the time. Then in 2019, my family and I went to go watch a new movie that had just come out, a movie called Godzilla, King of the Monsters. I then proceeded to not think much about that movie either, until like a year ago. Now I'm obsessed. So anyways, what's up my guys and gals, it's your boy Tyromaniac, back with another smoking hot video, and today, I'm here to talk about Godzilla, King of the Monsters. So normally I'd give you guys a spoiler warning right about now, but this is also like a 5-year-old movie we're talking about here, so if I spoil it for you, then it's kinda your own fault. Standard spiel aside, what am I actually doing in this video? Well, I guess I'm kinda just talking about a movie that I really like. Oh, and also at some point I'm gonna make the argument that this movie is the best in the Monsterverse, but that comes later. Oh, and for the people in the back, the Monsterverse is the current string of American Godzilla movies being made by Legendary Entertainment, not to be confused with the older Japanese Godzilla movies, the ones made by Toho Studios. Anyways, for right now, let's talk about what actually happens in this movie. So in this world, Godzilla exists. Shocking, I know. There's also like a dozen other kaiju just scattered across the globe, and somehow nobody knows about them. As usual, we can thank the feds for that, or more specifically, a secret government organization known as Monarch. Their whole job is basically just to monitor the giant monsters, or Titans as they're known, and make sure that they don't get up to any dastardly deeds. The movie mostly follows two Monarch scientists, Dr. Mark and Emma Russell, and their daughter, Millie Bobby Brown. I honestly keep forgetting that she's in these movies. They had a son too, but he made the crucial mistake of being in San Francisco at the same time as Godzilla. Anyways, Eleven from Stranger Things and her mom both get kidnapped by a band of eco-terrorists. Turns out that Emma was working on this device called the Orca that uses sound to control the giant monsters. And we know that it works because they tested it on baby Mothra and no one else. Side note, they use the term bioacoustics to describe how this thing is supposed to work, and I always thought that that was something they made up for the movie. Then I googled it while I was writing the script, and it turns out, no, it's actually a real thing. You learn something new every day. Just like how Mark learned that his daughter and ex-wife were just kidnapped, so now he gets to fly to Antarctica with Monarch to try and save them. Emphasis on try. Turns out that Emma was actually working with the eco-terrorists in secret. You see, those damn humans with their pollution and their war have been really messing up the planet for the past couple thousand years. The only logical solution is to individually wake up all the giant monsters hibernating across the globe one by one so that they can end the world before we do. Where better to start than with the biggest, meanest looking one that we don't know anything about? It's a plan so genius that Godzilla himself personally showed up to congratulate them for thinking of it. So yeah, turns out that the specific kaiju the terrorists went and woke up was Monster Zero, also known as King Ghidorah. After being frozen in the Antarctic ice for like 1,000,000 years, his first instinct is, naturally, to fly over to Mexico in search of some thick Latina baddies. I didn't realize Ghidorah was based like that. Wanting to hoard the Latinas for himself, Godzilla followed behind and eventually caught up after Ghidorah took a quick break to fucking execute some random seagull named Rodan. Then the US military tried to kill both of them because the Latinas are obviously rightfully theirs. They only succeeded in taking out Godzilla though, meaning now there's no one left to stop Ghidorah from accomplishing the real reason he went to Mexico, waking up all the other kaiju sleeping around the globe and ordering them to wipe out humanity. You see, Mr. Zero's been reading a few too many Omegaverse fanfics, so now he wants to be an alpha. Of course, everyone knows that Godzilla is the true alpha. He's been watching nothing but Andrew Tate podcast clips for the past 65 million years. Only problem is that the US military nearly killed him, so they send Dr. Serizawa to nuke him back to life. Perplexing how they send the Japanese guy on the suicide mission. What did the writers mean by this? Doesn't matter, because now Godzilla's properly juiced and ready to swallow a bottle of alcohol, and I feel like God. Doesn't matter, because now Godzilla's properly juiced and ready to kick ass, and he's even got Mothra to fight beside him. After some shenanigans with Eleven and the Orca in Fenway Park, basically every kaiju on Earth was making a beeline straight for Boston. So begins our grand finale, with Godzilla and Vanity Moth facing off against King Ghidorah and Rodan. Long story short, Mothra stabs Rodan, Ghidorah vaporizes Mothra, and Godzilla hits Ghidorah with that ISIS special. The day is saved, Godzilla proves himself as the true alpha and orders all the betas to stop killing everyone, billions died, and the terrorists responsible are still out there. Could you ask for a happier ending? Right, so let's talk about why this movie is the best in the series. You know, best in the series is a pretty subjective title when you think about it. I say this because most of my reasons are probably also gonna end up being pretty subjective. That said, I don't care. I'm right, you're not. So anyways, I figured I'd start off by bringing up a few general things that I like about this movie before diving into the bigger, more complicated points. Let's start with what's probably the biggest and also the most basic reason: the kaiju fights. Not really a surprise that in a movie about giant monsters fighting, the giant monsters fighting is one of my favorite aspects. Still though, for as crazy as it sounds to say this movie has some of my favorite fight scenes from any movie. Yeah, not just kaiju movies, some of my favorite fight scenes, period. I mean seriously though, watching these giant monsters move around with their stomping and their flying is just really cool. When it comes to the fights, every blow has weight to it and usually takes a bit of time to wind up, both of which really do a lot to show off just how much raw power these things are throwing at each other. Like, when Godzilla tackles a motherfucker through a building, you feel that. When he choke slams a motherfucker into the ground, you feel that. And when he breathes atomic fire in a motherfucker's face, you can bet your ass you feel that. Man, I swear a lot more in these videos than I used to. Honestly, it's not even just the fight scenes. Just watching them move around is enough of a spectacle. There's so many cool shots sprinkled throughout the movie, most of them involving something standing up tall, or spreading its wings, or flying with those wings. What can I say? I'm a sucker for character designs that involve wings. Of course, the visuals aren't the only thing I like about this movie. There are a lot of little things with the writing that I also really appreciate. For example, there are a lot of references to the older Toho movies that I never noticed in 2019, but I sure as hell notice now. One big example is the weapon the US military used to try and kill both Godzilla and King Ghidorah off the Mexican coast. They call it the Oxygen Destroyer, which is the exact same name as the weapon they used to kill Godzilla at the end of the original 1954 movie. Pretty neat callback to the monster's origins, no? Well, another pretty neat callback is the thermonuclear state Godzilla reaches at the end of the Boston fight. Believe it or not, this one's actually a reference to the 1995 movie Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. In that movie, Godzilla basically spends the entire time in a burning state, and it even kills him at the end. You might be angry at me for spoiling not one, but two classic Godzilla movies, and to that I say that you've had 70 and 29 years to watch them respectively, so get fucked. It's not just the references that make me appreciate this movie's writing, though. It's also the world building. This movie establishes a lot of plot points that would carry on into the later Monsterverse movies. It solidifies the idea of the Hollow Earth that was introduced in Kong Skull Island. It set the stage for there to be a ton of different kaiju roaming the Earth thanks to Ghidorah waking them up, and it gave Godzilla the chance to prove himself as the Alpha Titan. So, this movie has peak writing because of the references and the lore implications. Got it? Well, there is also one more thing beyond both of those. It's the fact that it just feels more epic. Like, the scale and the stakes in this movie are just something we haven't seen anywhere else in the Monsterverse. I haven't watched 2014, Skull Island was literally only about the island skull, and Godzilla vs. Kong was literally just what it says in the tin. The big monkey and the big lizard slapping each other before Mechagodzilla starts slapping both of them. Godzilla x Kong tried with the whole ape army invading the surface world thing, but I mean, come on, who the hell took this guy seriously? 2019 though? 2019 hit different. Like, Ghidorah won. He basically kicked humanity's ass and wiped his own with their tears. There was a whole legion of kaiju destroying cities and committing mass genocide across the globe. Meanwhile, Godzilla was on life support at the bottom of the ocean. It took the combined efforts of Godzilla being brought back from the dead, Mothra sacrificing herself, and whatever was left of the US Air Force to finally save the day. and even then it was a close call. King of the Monsters was really the only movie to have a story and action on that kind of scale, and it was the last one to really take itself seriously before the series got goofy in the Hollow Earth. Even the human plotline had an air of epicness to it. We had gunfights with eco-terrorists and a ragtag group of scientists racing to save the world. That would make a good enough movie on its own, even without the giant monsters. That said, I'm gonna use the aforementioned human plotline as a jumping point to bring up some of the criticism I have for this movie. Now, it's no secret that the people usually aren't the reason that anybody watches a Godzilla movie, but for some fucking reason it took Legendary like 3 movies to figure that out. A lot of people complain about how 2014 cut away from the cool monster moments, only to focus on the human characters for the majority of the film, but King of the Monsters 100% deserves some of that shade too. For example, watch this. I want that man shot, and I want the writer who gave him that line to experience having his like, the build-up to Ghidorah's gravity beams, or lightning breath in normie speak, goes so hard and gave me legitimate chills. But then we have this fuckwit butting in to drop the most useless one-liner in cinematic history. They're doing it on purpose. They have to be. There's no other way. It's not even like that's the only moment like it. There's another one during the Boston fight where a whole ass plane just drops into view and blocks out the final showdown. Anyways, yeah, there's my criticism. Singular. I mean, I guess I could talk about how stupid the writing is overall, but literally who cares? So yeah, that's also the end of the shorter points I wanted to make. So let's move on to the fun stuff. Well, here they are, the bigger, more complicated points I promised earlier. So, what do I like about Godzilla King of the Monsters? Well, the monsters. No shit. No, but really, I wasn't as familiar with Toho's famous kaiju roster when I first watched this movie back in 2019. I don't think. But even then, I still thought they were all really cool. Now, I am familiar with the OG Toho kaiju, and I still think the Monsterverse designs are really cool. Dare I say they're my favorite versions of these characters. I like that the Monsterverse is trying for a more realistic take on these things than the older movies did, and I think it works really well with the big four in particular. Mothra is probably the weakest in my opinion, but I still kinda like what they did with giving her various mix-matched insect parts, like a wasp stinger and whatever the fuck those legs are supposed to be. Also, the fact that she can use her wings to just hit people with that unmatched power of the sun goes immensely hard. One thing I do appreciate more in retrospect is her kind of symbiosis with Godzilla, which I didn't actually realize was something they just kinda invented specifically for the Monsterverse. They even worked it into her design, with there being a pattern on her wings that kinda looks like the G-Man's eyes. It's a nice touch that both makes Mothra herself feel more significant, and helps to make the world building in these movies feel more fleshed out. With the giant moth taken care of, next up we have Rodan, and honestly I think his redesign works even better. His association with fire is another thing that I didn't realize is an exclusively Monsterverse invention. Well, okay, maybe not, but it was never really his defining feature until this movie came out. I also like how they took inspiration from modern birds of prey on top of his usual pterodactyl-esque features. It makes sense as a logical add-on to his classic design, it looks cool, and it helps with the more realistic feel of the Monsterverse that I mentioned earlier. Just ignore the fact that he lives in a volcano. Perfect realism. Of course, we can't talk about the monsters in this movie without talking about the king of the monsters, the Big G himself. Honestly, he appears in every Monsterverse movie, and his design is pretty consistent throughout, so that's not really something you can credit this movie for specifically. What we can credit this movie for is something that a precious few movie studios are actually willing to do nowadays. Listen to their audience. When the new design for the American Godzilla was unveiled in 2014, fans of the franchise had a few complaints. Nothing too major, just stuff like, oh, his dorsal plates look weird, or oh, his feet look weird, stuff like that. So, what did Legendary do? They fixed it. Yeah, they actually took the feedback on the chin and then made the changes that people wanted. Pretty cool of them, but that's not the only thing they changed. See, the Godzilla in the 2014 movie was technically the tallest version of the character to ever appear in a movie, standing at about 350 feet. Then in 2016, Toho made Shin Godzilla, the first Japanese Godzilla movie in like 12 years, and they made their Godzilla taller by about 30 feet. The only logical response on Legendary's end was obviously to make their Godzilla even taller yet again, a whopping 4 feet taller. It's an absolute pissing contest, and it's probably my favorite piece of trivia ever. It's also about a mile off track. So let's find our way back on track and talk about Burning Godzilla. That one scene alone at the end of the movie is honestly just on a whole other level. Watching this guy literally radiate power as he steps up to Ghidorah and brushes off Bro's strongest attacks like they're nothing is legit chill-worthy. The aura is unmatched. Oh, and remember the symbiosis I mentioned earlier between Godzilla and Mothra? Well, they even managed to work that into the design, which is fitting considering Mothra's sacrifice is what made it possible in the first place. Look closely at his atomic pulse there. Notice anything familiar? Maybe Mothra's wings, perhaps? I love attention to detail. So yeah, Godzilla looks good in the movie named after him. Big surprise. Anyways, I would mention Ghidorah in this section, but I'm trying to do a bit here where I make another joke about foreshadowing that you guys won't hear or care about. So instead, we're going to talk about the original Titans that Legendary cooked up specifically for this movie. You know, the ones that got woken up from their million-year naps and immediately started killing everyone. Scylla, Behemoth, Methuselah, the Queen Muto, all those guys. Fun fact, for some reason I spent way too many years thinking that they were all Toho kaiju, and I didn't find out that they weren't until very recently. That doesn't have any relevance to what I'm about to say, just thought I'd bring it up. So yeah, I mean I like most of their designs and think they look cool and all, it's just I don't really care about them. To be fair, the movie doesn't really give us a reason to care about them either, they're all just glorified background details. I do like that a lot of them are based off real-world mythology though, that part's kinda cool. That's also the end of the first on my big list of points to make, so on to the next one. Right then, what's my second big reason for why I think this movie is better than the others? Well, it's actually really simple. Unlike said others, this movie actually knows how to make the giant monsters look, you know, giant. There's this thing called scale in these movies that can be pretty hard to get right. You see, there are 3 main ways of making something look bigger. You could A, look at it from a lower angle, B, put it next to another big thing to make said big thing look smaller, or C, make it move really slowly. I'm just gonna run down the list in order, starting with A. With monsters like Godzilla or King Kong or any of the others, the best way to make them look big is to film them from the ground or from a human POV. The closer the camera to the kaiju, the better. That way, you get to picture yourself looking up at them, which helps your brain imagine them as being bigger. That effect gets kinda lost when the movie decides to film the monsters from the air or from another monster's POV, especially when those shots are taken from farther away. Now with that being said, another method is to show the aforementioned monsters being bigger than things that we as humans already think of as massive. This is exactly why kaiju movies love to show famous landmarks like the Statue of Liberty or the Golden Gate Bridge being destroyed, because we know that those things are huge, so showing us a giant monster ripping them apart just makes said giant monster feel that much bigger. Now, this last example should really help you see my point a lot better. Honestly, this one is the easiest to explain. Big thing heavier and harder to move, small thing lighter and much easier to move. Therefore, make big thing move slow and loud stomp noise to make look big. So, why does that matter? Well, I think that these 3 little tricks are something that the earlier Monsterverse movies like King of the Monsters, Skull Island, and 2014, the one I haven't watched, did a lot better than the more recent ones like Godzilla v Kong and Godzilla x Kong. To prove it, let me show you 2 different clips. The first is from Godzilla's first fight against Ghidorah in King of the Monsters. The second is from Godzilla's fight against Scylla in GXK. So these scenes actually let us see all 3 sacred techniques in action. To GXK's credit, the Godzilla vs. Scylla fight actually follows the first 2 points perfectly. In both fights, we see the kaiju from a human POV to help emphasize their true size. Bars. We see Godzilla and Ghidorah charging at each other from the windows of a grounded aircraft, and we see Scylla's legs stabbing into the ground with crowds of people running every which way. Both shots also have buildings and various vehicles scattered around that exist solely to look tiny compared to these big guys. Where GXK falls behind is the third point: speed. You might have noticed how much slower Godzilla moves in King of the Monsters compared to GXK, and while making him faster might make for more fast-paced action, it comes at the cost of making everything feel smaller. It's less like a big monster moving through a normal-sized city, and more like a normal-sized monster moving through a tiny city, if that makes any sense. Overall, this is something that I think the earlier Monsterverse movies pull off a lot better than the more recent ones. With GVK and GXK, it starts to feel more like the 300-foot tall kaiju are the normal-sized ones, and all the humans are just tiny, especially with the series shifting into the Hollow Earth where everything is just ungodly huge. Remember that stupid baby monkey from GXK? Yeah, that little guy was like 150 feet tall. He's taller than Kong was in Skull Island. Doesn't look it, does he? With King of the Monsters, on the other hand, boy can you feel how big these guys are. Wait, pause. Anyways, did you know that Ghidorah's supposed to be like 500 feet tall in this movie? Did you know that both Mothra and Rodan have a wingspan of like 800 feet? That feels a bit more believable, don't it? You know why? Because they're all given the proper weighting and framing to make sure they actually look their size. I know this all might not mean a lot to some people, but it means a lot to me, goddammit. Remember earlier when I was talking about how good the fights in this movie are? About how you can feel every impact and how much that elevates the experience of watching it? Well, everything I've been yapping about in this section is pretty much the reason why. When every movement is slowed down, when we see these fights happening from a more or less human POV, that's when you're left to just sit back and gawk at the raw strength these literal titans are throwing around. So anyways, yeah, thank you for coming to my TED Talk where I schizo rant about how to make big things look big. Hope you enjoyed. Now then, time for my final and greatest segment about why this movie is the undisputed GOAT of the Monsterverse. Hit it! Yeah, that's right, bitch. Ghidorah gets his own segment. We stand Monster Zero on this channel and you're gonna fucking like it. Anyways, now please allow me to discuss why Sir Ghidra is indisputably the single greatest aspect of this feature film. Anyone who might find this assertion disagreeable is most welcome to Yeah, the lawyers advised against that one. Well, let's get started anyways. Starting with his design, there are some things that I've always thought were just like the coolest thing ever, even going back to when I was little. A few of those would be snakes, wings, lightning, and things being ungodly huge, and Mr. Space Dragon here has all four of those on lock. Starting with serpents. The way his next move was intentionally made to look like snakes slithering through the air, and there's a good shot or two where he uses his tails as an intimidation display kinda like a rattlesnake would. As for wings, I mean like, come on. Wings are just peak character design, end of story. Does your character look boring or generic? Slap a pair of wings on them. 120% improvement just like that. I'm gonna be honest, that's like half the reason why I like the character designs in Murder Drones so much. Big knife wings make peanuts hard. I don't know what else to say. Not only do wings themselves just look awesome, but you can also use them to create a lot of really cool shots. And none look cooler than the classic wing spread. Can you tell that I think wings are neat? Just about as neat as lightning, which is our next point. Lightning is just one of the coolest elemental powers you can have, and honestly I don't even need to explain it. Like, look at it. It's lightning. What else could be cooler than that? Then you have Ghidorah over here just puking up a metric ass ton of the stuff whenever he feels like. God, that never gets old. On top of everything else I said, he also has the sheer fucking size to make it all look that much cooler. See, a three-headed, snake-like, lightning-breathing dragon would go hard as fuck in any context. Now imagine that it's over 520 feet tall, with a wingspan that stretches over 3 football fields. But he's huge. I love it. There's also other things like how powerful his regeneration is. Oh yeah, he can regenerate by the way. How powerful his roars sound, the fact that he canonically has a Category 6 hurricane that follows him everywhere, and all the other stuff about his design. But honestly, I think we've had enough of that. I have other reasons for liking the 3 Gs in Adora that aren't just monkey brain dopamine hits. From a narrative standpoint, Monster Zero has to be the most perfect antagonist Godzilla's faced in the Monsterverse. First of all, that's literally how they describe him in lore. You have the Mutos in the first movie that were parasites literally evolved to prey on the Gojira species. Then you have Mechagodzilla in GVK that was a mechanical superweapon designed by humanity specifically to kill the non-Mechagodzilla. Then you have Scar King in GXK, who I, for the life of me, can't take seriously. Then there's Ghidorah. From what I understand about the lore, Ghidorah is just a generational hater. He's an alien that flew across space looking for a planet to invade, stumbled across Earth, then spent the next few millennia slapping around and being slapped around by Godzilla. The only time he wasn't beefing with the Big G was when he spent a couple thousand years buried under a mile of Antarctic ice. Raw as fuck. Hell, when Godzilla got flatlined by the oxygen destroyer, they literally said in the movie that the rivalry between the two ran so deep that they basically invented a new kind of hate just for each other.
Is there another creature that might stand a chance against him?
No. Ghidorah and Godzilla's rivalry was ancient and unique.
Yeah, what I said. Like, you can't even call that on site anymore. They literally go out of their way to beat the shit out of each other. For the on-screen events of this specific movie though, there is one other thing that makes King G Hydra the perfect antagonist. The fact that he won. Like, he won. He basically won. Ignore the fact that I'm doing the same bit I did earlier, by the way. Godzilla was dead, every other kaiju on Earth bowed to him and him alone, the military was powerless to do anything, and humanity was pissing itself in fear. His existence alone is classified as a mass extinction event, and you'd think that's part of the bit I'm doing, but no, it's his literal nickname. Bro accomplished everything he set out to do. The only thing that stopped him was Serizawa nuking his biggest op back to life. Even then, even with Godzilla being buffed by a literal atomic bomb, it was still a close fight. If it wasn't for that meddling moth and Dr. Bitchel distracting him, Ghidorah would have absolutely killed Godzilla a second time, and secured his second dub of the movie. Scar King could never. Speaking of which, compare that to the other Monsterverse villains. The Mutos almost killed Godzilla, but it was also a 2v1, and Godzilla killed both of them a few minutes later. I may not have watched that movie, but I did watch the final fight scene on YouTube. You could argue that Mechagodzilla measures up since he almost killed Godzilla and Kong, but guess what? Mechagodzilla is Ghidorah. Ghidorah's consciousness was used to build his AI, and eventually he just flat out took control for himself. My goat Monster Zero physically cannot stop catching W's. Don't get it twisted though, I still love watching him get melted by thermonuclear Godzilla. It just feels so good to watch him get vaporized as punishment for all his antics. Rip the best character, may he forever burn in hell. And with that, I have officially earned my bachelor's degree in D1 glazing. I've said everything I wanted to say about Ghidorah and this movie, so let's finally get to wrapping things up. So then, why is Godzilla, King of the Monsters, the best movie in the Monsterverse? Well, let's run down the list. Epic fight scenes, neat references to previous Godzilla movies, set up the lore of the Monsterverse, actually takes itself seriously, cool kaiju designs, actually makes the giant monsters look giant, and includes my GOAT Monster Zero. Lot of reasons. Some you may or may not agree with. Not my problem. Anyways, yeah. I would also like to add that I am in fact a fan of the Monsterverse overall, so don't take anything I say in this video too seriously. I throw a lot of shade at GXK, but it's all just for fun and jokes. That said, what do you guys think? Do you agree that King of the Monsters is the best of the bunch? Do you somehow disagree despite my opinions being objectively correct? Well, you know where to let me know. And I also know that that's it for this video, so remember to light up that like button, smoke that subscribe button, drop a big old comment, check out some of the videos on the left, and I will see you guys in the next video.